And by the way, please feel free to go back anywhere in the book that you'd like, because we're getting toward the end. And I'm always interested to hear, like, not only what you think of the material in front of you, but if you've had like experiments with this in your life and how they've gone. And it's okay if it's like not gone well, that's okay. So we can talk about 13 or 14 specifically, or maybe you've already read the epilogue, which is really a sweet story. It's a short and sweet story. But let me just open the floor to ask what's been meaningful for you in the last couple of weeks.
I think you just muted yourself.
I did. Alex came in and I was telling him somebody was here.
Okay. It's like, you're still saying something.
Well, I'm happy to hop in. The gratitude chapter is really interesting for me. I was really drawn to this idea about, well, how to write a thank you note. I'm a thank you note writer, like habitually. It's like almost like OCD about it. And I'm trying to figure out how to write a better thank you note. And so it's a little bit of a struggle to start out a note, but I've done this. You're doing blank, touched my heart in this way because. And I will say, and maybe it's because of where I am on the Enneagram or like my pathology with like language. I'm realizing that I used to write notes and say like, thanks for your generous gift to me or the church. And it's like, wow, why am I evaluating whether somebody was generous or not? Like, in some ways, I'm semi-comfortable with that evaluation, but to get out of that and just sort of say like, here's what your gift did for me. I need to interview people and ask how it feels to get the different kind of note, because for me, it's a little bit awkward, but I do really appreciate the idea of not using words like your gift was generous or your thing was this. Instead to say like, you did this, it touched my heart this way because. And there's this movie that ties into this that's kind of, I don't necessarily recommend the movie, but it's a Pixar movie called Raya and the Last Dragon. And the dragons like save people. And when everybody sees the last dragon, they do this thing where they like bow and put this over their head, which is like similar to the namaste, the sacred in me salutes the sacred in you. And when I saw that movie, I thought like, boy, I just want to start doing this to other people so that I can like intention set that like, hey, even when you're really the sacred in me salutes the sacred in you, which I really was drawn to in that line about how Sufi people talk about, the God in me is grateful for the God in you is expressed in such. Anyway, sorry, I went on too long with that monologue, but that's what stood out for me in this chapter. And I will admit it's awkward in chapter 14, awkward to think about how I phrase gratitude.
It does make people uncomfortable sometimes, especially if they're not used to hearing it. And for me, a gift of your time is always a huge gift. So if friends have come over for dinner or we've stayed after work to talk longer and they got stuck in traffic to drive home, like those are huge gratitude moments. I liked, I wrote a few quotes down this time that kind of spoke to me. And one of them was the author was talking about someone said, I kiss the God in you that allows you to give us what you did. And that one just gives me goosebumps even just saying it again. So that one was really pretty.
I've been thinking of several things. I had a Zoom conference with some of my educator friends in Texas who are so concerned about the anger that's coming to school board meetings and the comment that every parent wants a different curriculum for his or her child. And some of the anger that's been exhibited publicly at those meetings. So I go back and think about this book and how perhaps leaders in education could reframe questions and discussions within their school districts differently. Alan and I also look at a lot of fear that's generated on news as well. I have a cousin who's ailing right now, and she's losing her short-term memory. And she's so fearful of everything she hears on Fox News. So Alan and I try to remember some of the things that we've learned here and help her to put things in perspective, at least for the moment while she's remembering. So that fear and that anxiety and the anger that's coming out publicly have all been so prominent in our thinking right now as we're reading the book.
Thank you. Thank you.
There were a couple of times this week that I was able to have the opportunity to rephrase a thank you. One was with Ellen on Friday. We went for coffee, and at the end, I was able to say something like, I appreciate the time that you've given me today. I felt safe to share, because I felt safe to share some feelings that I've been struggling with.
Okay.
And that felt good to phrase it in just other than it was good to see you or thank you for meeting me, that kind of thing. Just be able to say how it affected me. And I realized another time was yesterday at the picnic. I was sitting in the shade next to my husband, Richard, and I was cold. And I mentioned that I was cold and that my hands were cold. And he reached over and held my hand. He's much warmer bodied than I am. And so the warmth of his hands helped my hands feel better and not so uncomfortable. And I heard myself when I got home, I said something like, I really appreciated you holding my hands today when I was cold. It made me feel heard and cared about. And I appreciated that feeling. I liked that feeling.
Yes.
So I'm practicing.
It seems really good to practice, you know, even though it may be awkward, it seems really good. I think because we know why we're doing it. And I think when we are living into that sense of why, I do think that communicates through our body language, or just like, for lack of a better term, like our aura that comes out. I could be wrong, but I think so.
Yes, and even though I didn't get them just perfect according to the author, it was an improvement. It was moving in that direction. So I was glad that I didn't look at, now, did I say that right?
Yeah.
It was just enjoy the feeling that I had in making the attempt to say things differently.
I appreciate that, Darlene, especially the last part of like non-judging of your attempt to do it. Because I think I'm definitely still struggling. It's after the fact that I'm like, oh, I should have done that, but I appreciate that idea of non-judging and just observing, and appreciating the attempt in itself.
Being nonviolent with ourselves.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And then I also, Jen, there was like multiple quotes, that one that you said, and then there was one, yeah, I guess, I don't know. He said, it showed me that I could receive appreciation joyfully in the awareness that God has given everyone the power to enrich the lives of other. I don't know. There's something about that that's like super, I just really appreciate that. It was really thought provoking and like empowering, I guess, in some ways, you know, that you can like enrich the lives of other people. I don't know. I liked that. And then I got a really nice thank you note yesterday afternoon. That was very, I was reading this chapter last night and I was like, well, check. So it was super, it was in it. I really appreciated the thank you note because I wasn't expecting it for one. But it was really, it really helped me to know that a gesture was, you know, really appreciated by somebody else and touched them. And that was really nice. So
More deeply than I can say.
It's very nice one. That's very nice.
You know, I want to offer to you, one of my colleagues was doing this training, and it's essentially empathy training parallel to NVC. And just a couple of thoughts on this. One is in the training, they work through a lot of different ways of practicing empathy. And they also say, look, you know, you don't have to be in NVC mode all of the time. You know, you can like give yourself some breaks. And what the author, I think, reminds us is that we can pay attention to intentions and give people generous assumptions, but there are moments where we can communicate our needs that are essentially teaching moments. Now, people may not always pick them up, but you know, I just want to offer sometimes what the author says, right, is I sense you're trying to express gratitude, and I'd like to enjoy it more than I'm enjoying it. So could you tell me what I did and how it touched your heart? You know, and I'm always very like, oh God, I would never say that. Like, that sounds like ungenerous. But what I appreciate about it is the author is saying like, look, the person's intention is really good and you're just helping them to have the impact they want to have. I don't know that we can always do that. And when I think about this, one of the biggest determinants is like previous relationship and then time. You know, like if I'm in a line after church and there's like urgency in the line, it's maybe not the time to do a lot of teaching. And that discernment is a little bit tough, and at the risk of, like, for lack of a better phrase, beating a dead horse, it's one of those things for me as I'm like in my own grief journey. How much do I want to be vulnerable with folks and say like, hey, I know your intention's good. Let me help you with your impact. So like when people say, I'm so sorry for your loss, I have to decide whether I say thank you because their intent is to have empathy, or to say, you know, actually sorry is not the word that resonates with me. It's like much more complicated. And I was at clergy conference and I realized, and this I think is really important, how general, like, especially in times of grief or in celebration, we're just terrible at this. I mean, we folk, our intent is usually really, really good, but I do think the words really matter. So I had this exchange with a priest that but I think relatively highly of, you know, and we know each other reasonably well, like we're colleagues, and the person said, I'm so sorry for your loss. And I chose to say, hey, loss is like not the word that's resonating with me. And the person put their hand on my shoulder, which I did not ask for, and said, well, losing your parent is so hard. And I realized in that moment, instead of being taken care of, this person was asking me to take care of them. What they needed me to do was say, yes, that's really hard. You know, I had to take care of their transference or projection, you know, and this was a clergy person, and like, we're trained not to do this, but I find myself all the time when somebody dies saying, I'm so sorry for your loss. And what I don't do is saying like, this is probably complicated, I don't know, but I would like to. I'd like to know what this is like for you. And, you know, you can't say that on the way out of church. There's just not time for that. And so like, we don't often have a lot of like real containers for listening. And I'm not saying this because I want y'all to like listen to my issues. What I mean is like, it's just occurring to me like how little we actually make room for other people to say how they're experiencing it. And our intent is really good. It's just that our impact is not great. not all the time. And so we rarely say, like, if you're willing to share, I'm curious to know how you're doing this. One of my friends at Clergy Conference said, well, I really like it when people tell me they've been through the ringer so that I know we got that in common. So maybe you could say, hey, I've lost a parent too, but that doesn't mean it's the same, and I'd be grateful to listen to how it is for you. That way you can do both. You can say, hey, I've had a similar experience, but it might be really dissimilar. I have to admit, when people have had a hard time with one of their kids, I like to know that, because I've had a hard time with one of my kids. It's nice, but it doesn't mean it's the same at all. So I don't know. To me, this is like where it becomes really, really important. And like, how do we equip the congregation, and how do I like learn myself and how to take better care of folk? And I think that's what the book is really guiding us to. One other thing I want to say about appreciation, I was learning a premarital counseling or a marital therapy method called Imago, which is actually pretty cool. It comes from a book called Getting the Love You Want. And one of the basic practices for like marriage maintenance is to every day with your partner do the following exchange. And it's not a question, it's a sentence stem. So you always start with, one thing I really appreciate about you is, and then the other person maybe parrots that back. And then you say, I appreciate that because, and the last thing you say is, it really reminds me of this thing from my childhood. And in some ways you hear like, oh, well, then you're just talking about yourself. But really what you're able to do is say, this is how deeply that little thing resonates within me. Like it joins my story way back. Maybe it's a corrective, like, hey, my mother didn't spend time saying what she enjoyed about me, and you do that, and so that touches my heart from way back. Or my mom always had snacks ready when we got home, and you do that for our kids, and like, it was so life-giving for me, and I love what you do for our kids. It's funny because it sounds like, oh, now you're just talking about yourself, but really I think what you're doing is adding extra verbiage to like, touches my heart because, and it goes way, way back. My wife won't let me do this. She says that's like too mechanical, but at the same time, it helps me to have a container because her love language, her need is words of affirmation. So it gives me this way of saying like, what can I affirm? Sometimes she doesn't want to know why. She said, just talk about me, don't talk about you. But I think we always have to like tease that out. But it's a cool practice to try to dedicate yourself once a day to the folk that you see, to say, here's something I noticed today.
Mm-hmm.
Alan, please.
Yeah, there was a section in there talking about in the last our culture, where buying, earning, and deserving and drive and all that sort of stuff is heavy on in our culture. And I have a grandson that is graduating senior University of Washington, and I got a friend's grandson who's graduating senior at UCLA. And I've been in conversation now with them because they're trying to determine what kind of job they take
And their life.
and what their life is going to be. And the pressure from peers and the interview process these days is pretty intense from the standpoint that employers are interviewing fairly quickly. They give short-term timeline as a response because they're trying to fill a certain quota. So you have to interview quickly and make decisions quickly. And my dialogue, they talk a lot about the job and so forth. But I always like to start with what makes them happy. I mean, the one in Southern California, he's a surfer and he likes beaches. The one in Washington is a outdoor person, camping and so forth. And it's clear that they both want to stay West Coast. And we talk a lot about they bring up their friends. Friends have a big impact. What are their friends are doing? Well, they're getting jobs in the area. And those friends they've developed over the last 4 years have a big impact on the decision. And then the lifestyle, do you want to be a 24/7, 7 days a week, or do you want to have a life? They want a life. And they have to think through that life and have sort of a 3 to 5 year plan. You're not going to stay necessarily in this job. You might step into another company, or you're going to go back to graduate school. Spend a lot of time not ever talking about what the job is trying to determine what their sort of values are, what makes them happy. And once we go through that process, then we move to what the job is. One's going into a consulting company. And, well, is the consulting company going to have Los Angeles clients, or are they going to stick you in Boston? Another guy had a job offer at one of these firms that law firms hired to go and investigate people. And I said, well, it sounds like that job puts you into a very adversarial climate. I don't think you'd rather be in a climate where they want you as opposed they don't want you. So I've been applying a lot of this stuff learned in this book, just working with 2 college kids.
Thank you. That's really cool. That's cool mentorship.
It is, and it's a lot of fun, and it keeps you connected to. In fact, I've had grandparents and their parents call me up and say, "Keep talking to them." They said, "You're making more sense to them than we are."
It's interesting to think about liberating ourselves from spiritual violence as well. If you don't mind me saying that, I think is probably like my principal call right now, is to like liberate myself. And it shows up hopefully in what I try to communicate, right? That we have these like terrible ideas about God's violence and like wrath, and we project that all the time, and like our fundamental unworthiness. And I do think it really matters to liberate ourselves from that, right? Because again, like I just don't think we can give what we don't have. And if we've got that spiritual bondage, I'm afraid we just pass it on. Darlene, you were going to say something. I'm sorry.
Yes, I was going to tell Alan that I really appreciate his willingness to spend time with these people. I know we've talked a lot about, we focus on our words. Do our words effective? But there was also a statement in the book about sometimes just a smile or a hug does as much as the words we say. And I think back about when my son was killed many years ago. I do not remember anything anyone said to me in my grief. I do remember 2 particular people that spent time with me. And it was time, it wasn't words. One in particular was a man who I did not know, but he was delivering, had driven a long way to deliver some products to me. And in the driveway as he was leaving, there was a mention that I had lost a son very recently. And he left and he drove about an hour and then called me back and said, could I come back? And I said, sure, I don't have anything else to do. I'm just being with my grief. And so he drove an hour back and sat in the living room and said, when he lost a daughter, no one was there for him to just listen to him. And he wanted to be there for me if I wanted to talk. And that provided the permission to share feelings. And so I will always remember that man. I do not know his name, but he gave of himself and his time. And he gave me what he had to give. He didn't have words of wisdom. He had his presence. And then there was a woman who was an acquaintance, kind of not close friend, but acquaintance. And of all things, she was a NASA engineer, and you wouldn't think that she would know to do this. But she came and sat with me, brought her knitting, and just stayed with me.
Yeah.
And I don't remember that she had anything wonderful to say, but her presence was comforting. So Alan, you may never know how impactful your time and your presence is with these people. So I applaud your willingness to share that.
Thank you.
with them. You have words of wisdom, but you also have a presence that they need.
I'm listening.
Well, it's really listening and asking the right question.
Yes.
And, we go into so many, you go to different parties and everybody
about
always
themselves.
tells you about themselves.
Mhm.
It's a rare person that asks you, what do you do? And it's I guess it's a human need
Yes.
to be able to talk about yourself, I guess. But this book has changed that approach. And Peggy and I have a number of older friends who've lost their husbands and who are widows that we really talk to them a lot. And they just bounce, they just talk, we listen.
Yes.
You said this really neat thing, Alan, about parties, because I've just come back from clergy conference, right? And there's like 300 of us, and it's amazing how most clergy talk to each other. I don't know if you know what this is like, so let me let you know. Let me tell you. In general, people say like, "I don't know you. Where is your church?" And like, "How are things going on in your church?" And I had this really nice moment. I hope I did this right. I said, like, "How are you doing?" And he started telling me about church. And I said, no, I actually don't care about your church. I'm asking about you. And, like, guy was a little taken aback, but then, started to share. And it's interesting because sometimes, like, what I've noticed that Western, like particularly Americans do, one of the first questions we say is, "What do you do?"
Mm.
And I have to tell you, I hate being asked that question, because as soon as I answer it, what tends to happen is a lot of projection. I'm really like, I don't want you to think of me as a priest, like based on the ones you've had or know. Somehow I just like worry about that, and it's one of these like weird things that happens we always have these debates like in seminary, and I came out of one particular position on this, like, can you be friends with your parishioners? And the wisdom in general is, no, you can't, because that's unhealthy. And I've really circled back on that. I will tell you, I can't be friends with all my parishioners. And the way I know is if I see somebody socially and we have to talk about church, we're not going to be friends. And by the way, that's okay. It's okay. Like, that's where we met and that's what we have in common. But if that's it, the friendship's not going to work. On the other hand, if I meet people socially and we can talk socially, there's a chance about the thing really being more mutual, and it's not that one's better than the other, they're just different. But that's one of the ways for me I can discern like what the odds are, because I do more than this, not much, but I do more than this. And it's just sort of interesting to be able to take, I think it comes back to protective use of force, because it is a little forceful to say, no, I don't want to hear about your job. I really would like to learn more about you. You almost have to like take a risk of interrupting somebody. Hopefully it never comes across as scolding, but I do appreciate him saying like, look, in order for us to meet our mutual needs, it might be worth taking a risk to say, this is not meeting my needs.
Mm-hmm.
I was in a conversation that the bishop was in, and I thought, is this a time to say, this conversation is not meeting my needs? I'm just curious to know if it's meeting anybody else's. And if it is, could you tell me which ones? I don't know if I wish I'd said that, but I can tell you it was true. The conversation, I couldn't see how it was meeting anybody's needs. And there were only like 7 of us. And, again, the bishop is there and we all have authority issues. All of us do, like probably everybody I know has an authority issue. And getting past that is is hard. And, like I've had really cool conversations with the bishop because he's a cool guy. But when I put this stuff in the between us, right, it's usually not very cool. Usually it's just sort of like awkward. But it's just a gift. Like I probably need to take some testosterone shots so that I have a little more fortitude to say like, this is not meeting my needs. I don't know. But I love that he says, we think of that as rude when it's a gift, because people really do want to meet your needs, and like the way they meet their needs is through mutual connection. And, like I put myself off on like, well, I don't want to be rude. And I just remind, Brene Brown says, right, you can either choose the discomfort of setting a boundary or the resentment that will come if you don't. And I'd never thought about it in this way, that I can set a boundary. This is not meeting my needs. If it's meeting yours, good, but if it's not, let's do something different.
Yes.
That's part of the liberating. Sometimes I need I need liberation from etiquette. Because I think etiquette really is designed to make you feel comfortable with each other, but sometimes we focus on the etiquette instead of the intent of the etiquette, which is to connect us and help us feel safe, right? And like the way we enforce manners either helps us connect, or it says like the manners matter more than the other person does.
The whole section he had regarding psychologists and psychiatrists versus the mental patients, I thought that was very interesting, because if you're in a setting where there's a group of people and you can generally pick out the psychologists based on the comments they make, as opposed to I thought these mental patients that he quoted were really sharp in this book. They gave good responses.
Yeah.
That whole dialogue I found interesting as to how the professional some kind of just miss what the patient's thinking.
I don't know if you've read the Gospel of Mark straight through, but in the Gospel of Mark, the only people who know who Jesus is are the mental patients.
Yep.
The people with unclean spirits. And all the like normal folk have no idea who he is. And maybe it's because their trauma has brought them to the edge. And so they realize, having come to the edge, what life could be. And those of us who don't go to the edge, I don't know that we always recognize that.
I worked in a psych hospital one time, and one of the staff, it was a staff that said this to me, the only difference between the staff and the patients is that the staff have the keys.
That's good.
Yeah, my dad said it, that the minute you think you're different from everybody else is the minute you're just like everybody else.
Yes.
Which is an interesting aphorism. Yeah.
I have a couple of thoughts, but I'm circling. So Alan, you said when you were kind of mentoring people, that you kind of start with what makes you happy and what your values are. And I think that's really important. And I wish that somebody, when I was coming out of college, asked me those questions. And then Darlene, you mentioned just that presence and not needing, the specific words, right? But just having that presence. And I just read this book called The Healing Presence. Can y'all hear me? It says I'm unstable.
No, I can hear you. Yeah.
My internet, I'm stable. My internet is unstable.
Funny.
Anyway, I read this book called The Healing Presence, which is for that medical school course doing, and it was very interesting. And one of the things it talked about was, it's not really about you, it's just about providing that space. And so it doesn't matter what the words are that you say in some ways. But just being present there with another person to allow that connection to happen, I think is kind of interesting. It feels a little bit, there's a little bit of tension there, because I feel like the words with C do make a difference, right, to some extent, but or the way the way you use them. But I think really just that allowing that opportunity for somebody to kind of up and share. There's something really important there. And I think that really fulfills that need for connection that I think most of us have. I don't know, I do.
I think we're socialized to think that we have to say something, and we're uncomfortable with silence.
Silent.
That's right.
So if we are silent, there's this anxiety that builds up, and we jump in with something to say. That's one of the hardest things when I'm training counselors to teach them is be quiet. What you have to say is not as important as what you need to listen to. And there's an anxiety that we think that we have to fill the silence, and the silence is healing. It provides that healing presence and gives that person a chance to do their internal thinking and feeling. And then when it's time to talk, they will talk. They will let you know when they need to hear from you.
That's right.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's hard to do the kind of listening that you need to do, right? Especially if you're in that moment of, silence, and I mean, for me, my mind does go to that anxiety place of like, what are the right words to say? But if I'm just really sitting there and listening, right, listening for the needs that the other person is voicing, then I think it makes it very meaningful.
I just put a weird link in the chat. I think it'll work, but it came from a Brene Brown training that I just did called Dare to Lead. And it's like her latest book is Dare to Lead. And that link is to a survey that if you register for, will take about 20 minutes to complete. And then it'll give you, I think it works. It'll give you a snapshot of your top values. And what's interesting is I don't think we always know what our core values are. We know what we'd like them to be. And usually, like, we pick more than 2 or 3, which means we have too many, right? Core values, you can only have 2 or 3. I just put it out. You can try it. It was interesting when I got it. There's 24, and it sort of ranks them 1 through 24 if you take this assessment, just as a way of kind of knowing a little bit more. And you could disagree with it always, it's just a quiz. But she uses it, and her organization uses it to help you know your core values. So when you have those clear, you can really lean into the good parts of them and sort of filter any of your discernment or any of your relationships through those core values, which will probably bring some of your gifts out more than you ordinarily do. So that's just a link. I think it works. You have to create an account, but it's not a phishing scam, promise, because I've done it, and it was interesting. I got different core values than I thought, but the reason I put that is sometimes I'm so conflicted on like who I am that I do violence, not like hurt myself, but I do violence to my own core 2 values.
Is that the character strength one? Is that what you're talking about?
It is, yeah.
I enjoyed that. That was a good one. I did that. I heard her talk about it in I was listening to Dare Lead, and I was like, I'm gonna look at this. And I thought it was super interesting. And like sort of looking at the 5 values, the top 5 or character strengths, I guess, was very informative. And it was interesting too, because I with a few other women were meeting, intermittently, and still sort of took the we all took the quiz or what it is, and it was interesting to sort of see where everybody felt, and like living into those strengths apparently is supposed to help with well-being, or anyway, I thought it was interesting. I would recommend it too.
And I'm going to tell you, like, I was really surprised to see value 24 is social intelligence. I sort of thought that I was more socially intelligent than all of that, but to see the top 2 values, which were not the ones I would have picked if you asked me, I've had to think through like how they might be. And yeah, it probably is right. If I think through just past what the word says. The only reason I share that again is like, sometimes I can do violence to my core values by not realizing that they're my core values.
Yeah, I've found like if the joy is missing in the day, there's boundaries that I allowed to move that pushed into those core values that I didn't protect. And here I am frustrated with another human, and it's all on me because I didn't say, here's this boundary and I'm going to keep this boundary and I'm worth keeping this boundary because I move them to accommodate someone else.
Yeah.
So
I appreciate that. And my second one is creativity. And I didn't think that. I always thought creativity was cool. I mean, but I never would have said it's one of my core values. But I do realize if I'm not creative during the day, I definitely, like, my shoulders go forward a little bit more.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So my top 5 all were very much I can't remember them at the moment, but I remember sort of reading the 5 and then like immediately going to this place of like judgment of like, oh, well, this is, top 5, not really served me all that well. And so then I sort of flip to try to be more self-compassionate and say like, because a lot of my top are very like out and like just very much like, relationship related and just all top 5 were like, give of yourself to other people in one way or another. And I was sort of angry at that. I was like, why do I always give of myself? So then I started to this flip to be a little more self-compassionate. And I was like, what if I like use these towards myself in some ways? So it was kind of this interesting way of looking at strengths and saying, hey, I use them a lot for other people and that is very life-giving, but why not try using them on yourself too? It was kind of interesting. I really enjoyed it. Yeah. And then I thought it was funny because one of my 5 was like leadership. And I have like quite a few leadership roles. So it's like, okay.
Yeah, but I think like you say, what's really interesting is, and this is where the reason I'm mentioning this is because of the self-liberating piece, right? Is to think through if this can be a tool in some self-liberation, because, I perceive you to be a fantastic leader, and maybe the leadership that is not life-giving for you is power over people. And I would say my perception of you is that you do a fine job in empowering people. So I think like non-traditional leadership, A+, and I hope you fail at traditional leadership. It's not like it, but I mean, I think that's an interesting, and maybe that's my creativity coming around, right? But like to think through like how we can leverage those top values to kind of not sit in judgment of ourselves, but like you say, to have some self-compassion and think like, that is in the bottom. And normally I do this. So like, why might it be in the bottom? Why might it be in the bottom? And again, like from my perspective, it might be because top-down leadership is like not super life-giving all the time. You know what I mean? Like, and this is where like that liberation piece and that self-compassion piece that the author's talking about, I think can come in even in those spots.
Thank you. Thanks. Appreciate that.
Well, no, I appreciate that you've done this. And, like I don't want to overdo Brene Brown, but, like a thing that she says that I think is really interesting is that all of us would benefit from writing down the names of the people whose opinions of us matter on a 1-inch by 1-inch piece of paper. And you have to use 12-point font, right? And so if you've got more than 3 or 4 names, you didn't do it right. And when I think about this, like the earlier thing, like we don't always have to be in NVC mode. Like those 3 or 4 people are the people that really we should be able to experiment with, because their opinions of us matter. And they're a really good way to say like, hey, I'm trying this new way of communication, and I would just like to know how it meets your needs, right? Or boy, I've been trying this and I'm tired, so let's just you and I talk like normal. Like it's interesting to think how you can leverage those. And I think that's really what she's saying about the core values too, is write down your top 3 on that paper, and then when you're like faced with a decision point, like come back to those best friends, because their opinion of you really matters, and let the other 21 just kind of hang out there. It doesn't mean they're not good folk, it's just that they're not your best friends.
Yeah. So Alan, that's why, if somebody had that conversation about, let's look at these values, when I was 20, man, that would have been really helpful. So those kids you're talking to, or young adults you're talking to, I'm a little envious.
Yeah.
They're really under a lot of pressure. They have a lot of opportunity. They're under a lot of pressure, both. What's not there is their interest in going back and living where their parents are. Their friends have a bigger impact now. I graduated from college, and none of them are going to be. One's going to stay in Seattle, and their parents are in Denver. One's going to stay in Los Angeles. Their parents are in Northern California somewhere. So it's. By the way, Mike, we've really appreciated this. The background of people like Darlene, Julia, and Jen is pretty incredible. There's some very talented people in the church that have a lot to bring to the table. I've been impressed with this whole book we've been working through.
I mean, you just think about what kind of parish we have. Like, what are the odds you find this parish anywhere else? And like, what a gift that is. I used to think it was just engineers, which is pretty life-giving. No, I mean, really, but you look at who we got on the screen, right? We've got like amazing teachers, physicians, mental health practitioners, and like the way that allows a conversation to be like robust and of expertise. Oh my gosh, it's amazing. Like the opportunities in this parish supersede like almost anywhere I've ever been.
I totally feel it.
We still have so far to go to save this world though, Mike.
Yeah, and like I don't know if I did this right in the sermon, but it is like this important thing I have to remember, right? Is that like I can't control outcomes, but I do have some say over inputs. And there is this part of faith that say like the small things matter, even if we can't always see, right? Because even invisible light has momentum and moves things. So I just sort of think that has to become our hope, is that we can't always see the effects. And I love that quote, right? That a wise person plants a tree whose shade they will never be able to enjoy. And that's what teachers do, right? And that's what clergy do. And honestly, that's like good communities do.
Yes.
I do agree with you. Yeah, like I wish, I even wish like our local area churches could like collaborate and like, get together around life, but I can't control that. So what can I do here? I think we can have that grief over like the larger bit, but the gratitude of where we are is really sustaining. I don't know why people aren't breaking the doors down to like be part of I'm serious. I don't know why. Like the excellence of care and hospitality, and I happen to think theology a little bit, is like really high here. Like I do. It's just fantastic and life-giving, and people are like joyful putting on a picnic, like, and that's silly. It's just a picnic, but it's not. It's like actually connecting human beings with like beauty and wonder and like camaraderie, and it's like amazing, and they like enjoy doing it. Like the priest didn't have to twist their arm. In fact, like it went the other way, which is like, it's just really cool. And a picnic matters. It's easy to forget, but it matters.
Well, we've really missed being there in person, but we're really glad we can Zoom in with you, and I'm not sure we'll ever leave Nassau Bay.
And talk about what a gift that is that our people have joyfully put together. And I mean, joyfully. Bob Ketchum and Todd Parker have just, you know, they show up and they do all these cameras and they research it, and it's amazing. And then they show up and they run the things. And you know, for me, I see like, oh, the immediate value is like people can't come to a funeral and now they can, or like it's COVID, but now like I've got people all over the United States watching services. And so in that sense, like we have more attendance than we've ever had because of this. And people who have moved like y'all and Carolyn Judy, who lives in Katy. Carolyn Judy is like a lifelong Episcopalian. She's like this beautiful human being. And she's like, I don't want to go to church in Katy. I get to keep going to church with y'all through the screen, you know? And like, in that sense, we don't lose her. Like it's a gift, you know? Anyway, well, so the sacred in me salutes the sacred in each of you. The God in me is grateful for the God that allows you to be who you are. I want to draw time to a close so that I can actually like, let you get to church on time if you're going, or take a deep breath. The plan is next week, we'll have a little bit of a different bit. We'll talk about the saints in our lives in honor of all saints, and I hope people show up. But if they don't, you'll hear some of mine. And then let's come back on NBC one more time on the 14th. The epilogue is really sweet because this is where you learn of his Jewish roots and the lens that gives him on like Christianity. It's like super amazing. If you haven't read it, it takes you 5 minutes, but it's sweet. I mean, it's like absolutely heart touching, the epilogue. And then we can talk a little bit about like what we want to do with this going forward some more, and how this is showing up. Thank you guys. I'll see you next week or the week after.
Great.